Um, the Mishnah stated that if something is makabel tumah, if something is susceptible to receive contamination, you cannot use that type of material. That means you can't use metal. Metal is makabel tumah. Metal, if you see, no one's using metal for Succah. Also, the item has to be detached from the ground. It has to have originated from the ground. Like we use bamboo sticks. They originated from the ground, branches. These are all items that are permitted to be used for stock. But things that do not originate from the ground, let's say leather can't be used, pieces of leather can't be used, of pieces of clothing, wool, all those things are not grown from the ground. Besides, many of those things also would be makabel tumah, susceptible to contamination. The Torah wants specifically items that can, I don't know if you want to send out to the group that we're on. Thank you very much. The Torah wants items that are not capable of contracting contamination. There are one in Dr. Navid. Yes, we have a holy tzaddik from Florida that joined us today. And we said a nice idea. Morning, Max. Welcome back. Good to see you. We said a nice idea that perhaps the idea, the sukkah, good morning, Mr. Haber. We said a nice idea that the sukkah has to be something. It's symbolic of life. That you're not supposed to, in life, you're not supposed to contract tumah. We said, Mike, I think it's a nice idea. Good morning, Mr. Haber, that you go out to the sukkah, right? You're going out to the sukkah, you're going out to the elements of the world, so to speak. You're leaving the comforts of your home. You can't have a sukkah in your house, meaning your house can't be a sukkah. Of course, if you take off the roof and you put it, that's not your house. That's called you put a new sukkah. But there's when you go out of your house, symbolic of going out to the world, your job is not to contract contamination. Don't get tameh. And therefore, the schach, which is the main point of the sukkah, is the schach. The sukkah is called because of the schach. Has to be something that's not able to contract to. You have to make yourself in a way that you will not be able to contract contamination. Okay, so that's just an idea about the sukkah. So again, we're back to the Gemara now, is back to that idea. The Gemara is back to the idea in trying to identify which items are proper for schach, which items are not proper for schach. The Gemara is today going to talk about flax. The flax is a plant, comes from the ground, that you make linen from flax. There's a whole process in the processing of flax. There's the soaking of the flax, there's the feeding of the flax, separating it, the part that you're going to use. Maybe Mr. Haber can tell us a little about the flax, about the linen industry. I don't know if Mr. Haber will give some, and you know that's linen. And then you beat the flax and you comb the flax. There's many different parts of the process. You should know that there's a coat company called Canali, right? Is it called Canali? Right? The Canali Coat Company. One of the members of the group who's not here now, once gave me the Canali coat to bring in to test for shatnez. I brought it to the laboratory, the original laboratory in Williamsburg, and they showed me there's a shatnez in the collar. Because it's $1,000 coat, maybe $1,500, $2,000 coat. And the more expensive the coat is, the more likely it has, or coat or suit, more likely it has shatnez, because they want to make it in a night, because the piece of linen in the collar gives it a very good hold. So that was the story with the Canali coat that I brought in for shatnez. They had to remove they go to a special tailor to remove the shatnez. So this past week, I looked up, I showed someone about the Canali. He didn't know anything much about Canali. So I showed him, look at the website, look at what they advertise. 1,500 stores, and they're advertising wool linen suits. Wool linen, the blend of wool linen, which is really that's shatnez, wool linen, and that's what they advertise. So we watch out from Canali. Be careful. What? Yeah, at least they say if the people hopefully won't go for so it's fishy over here. Just people have to be aware. So getting back to our Gemara, we are now on Yud Beis Amud Beis. We are on 12b, 12b2. On the top of the page. Oma Rabba Bachana Rabbi Yochanan. Everyone have it? Okay, so the Gemara, I want to find the point in 12b2. Oma Rabba Bachana Rabbi Yochanan. Succah ba'anitze pishta. If somebody covered his sukkah with bundles of combed flax, that the flax was combed, that means it already reached the final process. It's already combed. So therefore, this is pretty much very, or it's at least deep into the processing. At that point, once it reached the level of combing, it's already susceptible to contamination. Okay, if you look on the bottom of note 8 on the bottom, where they talk about the processing of the raw flax into linen, it starts by soaking this flax stems in water to loosen the fibers. That's step 1. Step 2 is the stems are then beaten to separate the fibers from the wood of the stem. Step 3, the fibers are then combed to remove the remaining woody material. And then the long soft stem can then be spun into linen thread. So very good, exactly. So that's what the Gemara is going to say, like Mike said. This is when they worked on it. They did many steps of the process, and they're ready to the point that they combed it. But what about if it's raw flax that you did not do anything to the flax yet? It came from the ground, and you didn't even soak it. You did nothing to it. That you could use for stuff. At that point, since you did not process it, it's not makabel tumah. It's not susceptible to contamination. Generally, a lot of things. If you have an item which has no use, so it's usually for something to contract contamination, it has to have some sort of purpose. It has to be like a kli, a useful type of thing. But if at this point it's raw material, so it's not going to be able to contract contamination. And what does it mean it can't contract contamination? That means, let's say if somehow it comes in contact with a dead body. Let's say there's a dead body in a room, and then there's this flax. If it's raw, the flax will not become contaminated. Even though it's in a room with a dead body, the food that's in the room, the drink in the room will become contaminated. The utensils in the room become contaminated, but not the raw flax will not be contaminated. Just like if you would have had an earthenware utensil that was broken. Once it's broken, it's broken. It cannot contract. It doesn't contract contamination. It has no. It's in that stage of it's not useful. So too the flax in its raw stage, Mike, you planted the flax and you took and you cut the flax. It's not going to be able to contract contamination. A dead mouse goes on it. It will not. The dead mouse sitting on top of it, it will not contract contamination because it's raw. But the Gemara here is going to discuss what about if it's not. It's like you did part of the processing. You didn't do the whole processing. But you didn't do the main parts of the processing. You did partial processing. What status does that have? Would that be considered already susceptible to contamination because you already reached a certain level in the processing, or is it not susceptible? Linen. The end product is you're making linen. That's what you're doing from the flax. Linen you're going to make if you're going to use linen for clothing or whatever purpose. What does it have to do with sukkah? If you want to take this flax plant and you want to use this as schach, you want to cover the ceiling. Now, of course, once it's a garment of linen, you can't because it's susceptible to contamination. But here we're talking about before you got to that point, that it's already a garment. You're just in the beginning stages. You just planted this flax, and you cut the flax. So at that point, you could go ahead and just like if you have a stick, you can use this at that point. Question is, how far into the processing is it only? Could you use it only if it wasn't soaked at all? What about if if you did step one, you soaked it? Is that already susceptible to contamination after the soaking process? Or you did it, or you went ahead and you soaked it and you beat it. That's right. Schach, in order for schach to be kosher, it has to have a history. We have a history. We come from the ground. Where does the person come from? The ground. And like I said, you have to make sure you, the person, does not makabel tumah. Remember, you come from the ground, and you're not makabel tumah. So the schach has to have those 2 points: coming from the ground, and it's not capable of contracting what? Contamination. It could be a dead body on top of it. Can't get that contamination. So that's and it also has to be separated from the ground. We are separated from the ground. We're not attached to it, just like the person. So if you have a tree which grows from the ground, branches that came from the ground, they're not susceptible to contamination in the tree, but you can't have a tree. Branches have, you're right. You can't if the branches are attached to the tree, they're not. That means it's not separated from the ground. They're not kosher for stuff. Meaning, if you have it, that's why it's a big issue when you make a sukkah. You got to look what's above. If you have a tree that's above your sukkah branches, that creates halakhic issue that could wound your sukkah. Therefore, you got to go ahead and make sure you cut those branches before you put up your sukkah. That means it's not getting any nourishment from the ground. If you have separated ground, means that you cut the branches off the tree. But let's say if you use the palm trees, because the palm trees they're not attached to the ground. They're not you cut, they're already cut like a lulav. They're cut. They're not, you're not using it as, but just if you go back to the old days or even today, imagine a guy in his backyard, he has a tree, a low tree, and it has branches, the branches are coming over like this. And he goes ahead and would that be kosher for stop? The answer is, since if the branches are connected to the tree, it's still part of the ground. They need to be cut off from the ground. They can't be attached to the ground. Well, as long as you cut off if you're using an iron that's cut off from the tree, that's fine. It has to be cut, but it can't be on the tree when you use it. Let's say there's a vine. The Gemara talked about a vine, right? A vine, if it's attached, it's still attached to the ground. Exactly. You can stick on the tree or something like that. That you can't go ahead and right. Or you pick up the branches when they're attached to the tree and you move it on top of your walls. You can't do that. You have to be detached. That's another halacha. But the question is, the fact that you started processing the flax, but you're processing the flax because you want to make linen. You're 100%. But the question is, why can I use it? Is it the question? It would depend. Is it able to contract tumah contamination at that point? I started the processing. You're very good. You're right. The schach has to be placed on for the purpose. Also, there's a law like the schach has to be placed on. Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning.
The schach has to be placed on with the intention that it's to protect from the sun, be a protection for shelter. That's true. But let's say this flax that I went ahead and I planted, and I cut the flax, and I soaked the flax, and now I want to go ahead and use. And I say, you know what? I want to use this flax for schach. He says, I want to use this flax for schach. I want to use this flax to cover my cover my walls. I'm putting up a sukkah. I don't have any materials. I want to use this. Can I use that material flax? So that's what the Gemara here is going to be discussing, Simon, at which there's different stages of the processing of the flax. And there's a certain stage that you definitely can use the flax. There's a certain stage that you definitely cannot use the flax. Then there's the in-between stage, which is a matter of issue, matter of question, which is not so clear. Can you use the flax at that time or not? So that's what the Gemara is on. We are on 12b2. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bar Chana says the name Rabbi Yochanan. Succah b'anisi pishtam psula. If you went ahead and you place the schach, you use the bundles of flax, the bundles of linen here as schach, it is psula. It is invalid because the flax is, if it's already combed, it's already, you're already talking about that, it's already soaked, it was already ready soaked, beaten, combed. So then the sukkah is invalid because it's already susceptible to contamination, the flax, by the time you placed it on. However, if you went ahead and you used behutzne, hutzne is when it was unprocessed. You didn't even soak it at all. So if you'd use the hutzne, that would be hutzne pishon, that would be kashera. That would be kosher. So the two extremes are very clear. Unprocessed at all, no problem. Processed, it's already combed, problem. What about, now comes the Gemara, v'hushne pishton ein yodea. The rabbi said, Rabbi Yochanan said, that if it's hushne pishton, if it's the pishton that was processed, partially processed, ein yodea. Rabbi Yochanan says sometimes a rabbi sometimes doesn't know the answer to the question. It's not clear to him what's the answer to the question. So we walk, hello, Ariel. So what did the Rabbi Yochanan, the great Rabbi Yochanan, who was the leading rabbi in the Holy Land? So Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't know. I don't know. It's not clear to me what is the status of partially processed flax. Is it susceptible to contamination once it already was partially processed? Or does it have to be more fully processed? That's what he says, I don't know. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Now, we had, who was the one who reported this statement from Rabbi Yochanan, right? It's Rabbi Bar Chana says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, I don't know, Rabbi Yochanan said, I don't know what the law is by partially processed flax. Comes Rabbi Bar Chana, who quoted the rabbi, the chief rabbi. Now he himself says, I don't even know what he means by partially processed flax. What does the rabbi mean when he says, I don't know? The rabbi, the big rabbi says, I don't know what the law is by partially processed. Which part of the process that is partially did the rabbi not know? Which state of the process did the rabbi say he wasn't sure about? Stage one of the process, but if it reached one part of the partially processed, is that already called partially processed? Only if it was at stage two, right? Does he mean if it was soaked? Now the rabbi doesn't know what the law is by soap. So far we see this: soap, part one; beaten is part two; combed is part three. That's the seemingly we're focusing on those three steps. Which step did the rabbi say? Which step in the processing the rabbi says he's not sure what the law is? Is it after step one? He wasn't sure. Or step one, he had no question about it. He's only questioning about if it was step two already. Where was his question? So let's see the Gemara. The hushne atzman, hushne itself, the partial processing, ini yodea, manishach. I don't know how to explain this partially processed part. Eat dayak, it susceptible to contamination. But what's happening here is we have two rabbis on the scene. Rabbi number one is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi number two is Rabbi Bachana. Rabbi Yochanan said, partially processed flax, I don't know what status it is. I don't know. I don't know if it's already susceptible to contamination or not. I mean, he's in the Holy Land. There's a lot of land. He knows the stage. He knows what it is, but his issue is this enough? Is this part? Is this? It's not a question of knowing what it was, what happened here. He knows what happened. He knows it was partially processed. But the question is partially processed, does that already take it to the next level that is susceptible to contamination or not? Something that's fully processed is already susceptible to contamination. In the linen, he was not sure what status does a partially processed linen have. But he did not identify his question, his doubt. He didn't identify to us clearly. He knew what he wasn't sure about. But Rabbi Bachana, the second rabbi, says, I don't know what Rabbi Yochanan was referring to when he said partially processed. What does it mean? Which stage of the processing he was not sure about? So that's what the Gemara itself is going to spell out. The second rabbi's question on what the first rabbi was discussing. Yes. Yes. Correct. Succah that has the ability to contract contamination. A utensil, you can't use utensils. Wooden utensils that were made into they're able to have a receptacle. We use flat little pieces of wood that are narrow. We don't use leather materials, things that have the ability to contract contamination, or at that point you can't. First of all, the leather doesn't grow from the ground, but even something that grows from the ground, like flax, we can't use a finished product of flax. We can't use a finished product of linen to put up on the sukkah, because that linen. Yeah, so the commentary describes the three stages. If you look, Mr. Haber, look at number 8 in the commentary on the bottom regarding the flax. Okay? Good morning, Yosef. Good to see you.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good to see you.
So now we're going to Gemara now. Thank you. The Gemara is now going to explain the situation. If flax that was beaten and not yet combed is called hushni. If it was beaten, it reached the process that it was already beaten, but it wasn't combed. Is that the case that he was not sure about? Because it's already close to the end product, because already beat the flax, but tari. But if you just soak the flax and you didn't reach the next level of beating it and separating some of those fibers, that would be kosher. He had no question. Rabbi Yochanan had no question in that case. That's one possibility? Old Dilma, or perhaps Rabbi Yochanan was not even sure about if you already did just the soaking. Dilma tari v'lo dayak nami hushne karelei. If it was soaked and not beaten, maybe that's also something that he wasn't doubting, that he had a question. So that's what the Gemara says. So again, Rabbi Bachana is not sure at which stage Rabbi Yochanan was in doubt. Rabbi Yochanan had a doubt at a certain stage in the processing of the flax of whether that it reached a point that is susceptible to contamination. Which stage was he not sure about? Was it stage number 1 after the soaking? He already was not sure. Or no, he had no question about the soaking. Just soaking? That's nothing. That's not going to make it susceptible to contamination. His only question was when you already soaked it and you beat it, beat it, now maybe already, that's his question. So that's what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yochanan himself is not sure at which point is the question of the flax. But what is clear, if it's raw, if it wasn't even soaked, you could go ahead and what? You could use it. If it was not, if it was combed, it was soaked, beaten, combed, you definitely cannot use it. But then there's a gray area, which is not sure if it was soaked, could you use it? Or if it was beaten, if you could use it. Those are the two possible situations. Okay. Let's continue. In the Shulchan Aruch, it goes into the details. Right. You're certain, right. The question is, how advanced does it have to be concerned about it? The soaking, beating, and combing. Those are the 3 stages. Okay. Omar Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Yehuda said, "Now I don't think we have such." I looked into the halacha. It's interesting. The Mishnah Berurah of its time discusses the halachas on this. But for our purposes, I don't think we're using flax. So if you're going to be using flax, we'll discuss more about the practical halacha of which stage can you, which stage, in the halacha, how far do we go? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hani Shushay Ushvatzrei. Shushay v'tzvatzrei, these are herbs that are not edible for a person, for human consumption. And since they're not edible for human consumption, Rashi says they're not susceptible to contamination. You have a food, right? You have a food generally, a vegetable, can become contaminated, right? Food has the ability to become contaminated. But if it's a food that's not called a food, the person can't eat. Let's say it's too sharp, too strong, it's too whatever, you wouldn't eat it. That's not a food. And it's not a food for a person, it's not susceptible to contamination. And you could use it for what? For schach. Why can you use it for schach? Because it grew from the ground, this herb grew from the ground, and it doesn't attract contamination. So what's the problem? Take these vegetables and put them on top of the sukkah. However, comes Abaye. Abaye comes and he says, B'shushay misachachim, b'shvatzrei lo misachim. He says the shushay vegetable herb you could use, but the shvatzrei herb you can't use. So the Gemara said, what do you say? These are herbs that are not for food for you, and maybe they're used for animals, but people, it's vegetation that maybe animals would use. But just like the, hay is not human consumption, right? We have hay would be grows from the ground, right? And it's not makabel tuma. So hay would be allowed to be used for schach. Just like you can use branches, cut branches for schach. So this type of this herb is, Mr. Haber, it's not edible. Straw is for a person. Straw is
The
also
problem
not
with schach, Rabbi, that the branches, very likely, from also experience, that the leaves will dry, fall off from the branch, and then you're left with no schach in the middle of the Sukkot.
Well, very good. We're going to discuss, right? Yosef, the Gemara is about to talk about your case, similar case of yours, about the leaves falling off. Getting back to our case, he says you could use this herb because why not David? People don't, it's not a food. Now comes Abaye and says, B'shushi misachin, b'shvatzri lo misachin. My timer. What's the problem with that herb? Why can't you use it? We're now on Kiva. Now we're on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. 13a, everybody. Kivan the Sari Rechayu. Since it has a bad smell, the herb has a bad smell. Shavik Luhu V'Nafik. There's a concern. You might leave the sukkah, Ariel. You might leave the sukkah. If somebody has a bad smell or gives off a bad odor, you might leave the sukkah. And we want you to stay in the sukkah. You're supposed to be in the sukkah. You see, if the mitzvah of sukkah, spend your time in the sukkah. So if there's something in the sukkah, there's a bad smell, a bad to here it's not going to contaminate because it's not edible for a person. But the problem is it gives off a bad, one of them gives off a bad odor. And if it's a bad odor, the problem is you might leave. You won't stay there. And if you won't stay there, the whole purpose of sukkah, you should be eating in the sukkah. We want you to be in the sukkah. We don't want you to leave. Just like we had the Gemara that talks about if you're in the sukkah, if your table's outside the sukkah, you might come to eat from outside the sukkah, or you might foul your table. They bring down over here that this is lechatchila. But if at the end of the day, you went ahead and you made a sukkah from something that doesn't have a nice odor, technically you could still fulfill your obligation in such a sukkah. It's not the ideal way to do it. And let's say if you went ahead and you sat in the sukkah, even though it had a bad odor from the schach, let's say some of the materials gave off a bad odor, technically you still fulfilled the obligation. We finished the flax. The Gemara finished with the flax. The Gemara did not answer the question at which stage is susceptible to contamination. And now we got, say it again, what? It could be, right, it could be on the soaking stage, the beating stage, any of those stages is a matter of a question. And the Gemara now says that you should not use a material that gives off a bad smell, but if at the end of the day, let's say a guy has no other sukkah, and you're in a sukkah that has the schach gives off a bad smell, technically if you have no other sukkah to go to, you technically would be able to fulfill your obligation in such a sukkah that the schach gives off a bad smell. But I would definitely believe that you should find a better sukkah. You should not stay in such a, if you have a better sukkah to go to, you should go to a better sukkah. Now, if the schach gives off such a bad smell that you can't take it, that it's really you're repulsive by that smell, then it's possible that the sukkah would be invalid on a Torah level. That's there are those that even say that if the walls give off a bad smell, it should be the same problem as the schach that gives off a bad smell. If the issue is the bad smell is going to cause you to possibly leave the sukkah, so what's the difference if the bad smell comes from the wall? And morning, Boaz. Okay, so therefore we have to make sure we got a nice sukkah should smell nice. It should be very comfortable. The people should want to stay in the sukkah. Okay, comes the Gemara. Now it's going to address Yosef's issue. Omar, we are on the top of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, the top of 13a. Omar Rabba Rav Chana Barova Hani Hizmi the Higi, these type of bushes. These are type of things that grow, bushes that grow from the ground. And the question is, can you use these for schach? So what's the problem? You cut the bush. It's not susceptible to contamination. It has no use. It's like and you throw it onto this in the sukkah. It grew from the ground. What's the problem? He says, Hani Hizmi Vihigi, you could use thorn bushes. You could use these types of things for schach. No problem. You cut the thorn bush and you threw it on the top. No problemo. That's his first opinion. However, Abaye Yama, and Abaye and the halacha seems to follow Abaye, because there's a letter on top. Abaye Yama behizmi misachachin. If you want to use that type of bush, the hizmi bush, they call the hizmi bush the bramble, the brambles. I don't know if you know brambles. Mr. Haber says he knows what brambles are. The brambles bush you could use. However, the thorn bush, but the behigi lo misachin. Behige, you can't use thorn bushes. What's the problem? I cut the thorn bush. What's the problem? The problem is my timer. Even the nasri tarfayu, the leaves fall off into the sukkah. These leaves constantly fall off, and since the leaves fall off, you're not going to be comfortable. You're going to want to not stay in such a sukkah that you have things going into your food. You have things disturbing your stay in the sukkah. So that's another reason why. So we want you to want to stay in the sukkah. And therefore, I think if I recall, Rabbi Heinemann from Baltimore, could be he might have air conditioner, or steam. They put a steam in the sukkah. Certain people do certain things to make the stay in the sukkah very comfortable, because we want you to stay in the sukkah. So kivan the nasi tarfayu shavik luvanafik. You're going to leave the sukkah, and therefore you cannot use the thorn bushes for schach, because you're going to leave. Omar Rav Gidel Omar Rav. Rav Gidel says in the name of Rav. Now we're going back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said you cannot use bundles of wood for schach. If you have a bundle of wood, now according to Tosfos and Yerushalmi, that means 25 sticks. If you have 25 sticks, a bundle is not a minimum of 25 sticks. You cannot take that bundle and place it for the intention of schach, because, and the Gemara explained why the issue is the concern. Now the Gemara says, "Hay afkusa de dikla." Afkusa de dikla of the palm tree is the bottom part of the tree. At the bottom part of the tree, many branches come out together. So now the question is, can I take this bundle of branches, and let's say there's even 25 branches, they're coming out together. Can I use this for schach? Now, you might say there's a problem. It looks like a bundle. They're all together. There's many, many pieces of this bottom of the tree that are connected together. So there's a chidush is, since it wasn't connected by a human being, it was connected by natural connection. That's not called a bundle. So the Gemara says, "Hani afkusa de dikla afa misachim gebu." You can go ahead and use it for schach. However, the Gemara says, "Afa gav dagidi," even though it's tied, eged b'dei shemayim lo shme eged. If it's tied to heaven, if heaven tied it, it's not called tied. The obvious question is, what's the difference whether it was tied by heaven, whether it's tied by a human being? The fact is, it's a bundle. Why should that make a difference? Who tied the bundle? Whether God tied the bundle or I tied the bundle, it should be a problem. So one of the commentaries say the following: what's the problem with why can't we use a bundle? The problem why can't I put a bundle on a sukkah is because we're afraid I might use a hut that the bundle was placed there for the purpose of drying out purposes, not for the purpose of a shade, not for the purpose of protecting from the sun, but rather to dry out. But that was only a concern, a bundle that was tied by a person. That's what's usually made. That's to dry out. If I place a bundle that was tied by me, I might come to use a bundle that was tied by another person or myself for schach. But and if I originally placed it there for the purpose of drying out, it's not kosher schach. but things that were, but are not usually to be stored. You don't usually, bundles that are dried, that are created by heaven, like these type of things are not common that you would go ahead and place to dry out. So therefore, they didn't find the need to make any zera. Again, we're gonna end with this point. The zera, the concern for the rabbis was, if I'm gonna go put a bundle of wood on the sukkah, if I will have a previously bundled sukkah that I put bundles on weeks before in the summer, I placed bundles to dry out on top of my sukkah. If I allow these bundles, then people will think I can use those bundles. And those bundles were not placed for the purpose of shade. They're placed for drying out. But that's the common bundle. But a bundle that's made by heaven, it's not a bundle that usually you would put on top of something. So therefore, we don't have to worry about it. Before sukkahs. That's true. But I might use it. But if I have a prefabricated, I already made it weeks ago, I might say the same way I could use this sukkah. If I put a bundle on it, I might say, if this bundle works, that sukkah has bundles on it from the sun would work, but it's not good because that was that. What'd you say? You could technically will before it, but if it's intended for the purpose of schach, you intended it for the right purpose. Have a great day, everybody. All the best. Thank you all for being here. And
Thank you, Rabbi.
special welcome to our special guest from Florida. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.